First of all, thanks for having me. One of the things that I think is important about the whole nutrition game, and I think you rightly frame it in that if you learn some almost what I would call heuristics, just some illustrations of how your body works with fat loss, it does become easy. Like you just said, it just clicks into place. And I'm gonna simplify a few things, but I really do want to get into the details a little bit just so people understand exactly what's happening in their body. But you brought up metabolic positioning, and that's the way that I have taught how your body can access fat as an energy source at a much higher rate. So people get frustrated sometimes that they're losing weight too slowly. They get frustrated that it comes back on, far too quickly, too easily. And there is a way that you can eat and accelerate how much body fat loss you lose. Up one study I've quoted for years showed up to 50% more fat loss just because you get into a metabolic position. That's just a general term that I coined to describe this, where your body is using a higher percentage of body fat between meals all the time, around the clock, from day one to day 1,000 of your diet, however long you're going to be doing this. And then you can be in control of what that rate is. There are times you may go on vacation. You don't want to gain 10 pounds back, but you're okay being neutral, for a week or two, and that's okay. But if you learn how to control where you are on that metabolic position scale, or another way to think of it is the energy continuum, am I using more carbohydrates from my food, or am I getting back into using more body fat? Where am I on that continuum? This stuff is very important, I think, for people to understand. So I'm glad you picked this topic, Kyle. I think it's going to be good.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think everybody probably gets a little bit buried in the weeds of, you hear things like should I eat carbs or not carbs? Should I do this or do that? I was just watching a podcast interview with a celebrity psychologist, and the interviewer said, gosh, you look amazing. You're thin and healthy, and I've heard you've been doing something. And the guy said, yeah, I've been doing this thing because my daughter has an autoimmune disorder, and so she's been trying some different nutritional tactics, and I decided I would try. And he said, I've lost 52 pounds in 7 months. And the interviewer said, well, tell me what you're doing. He said, I eat nothing but beef. And he said, well, and so you would assume, okay, he's probably talking about the ketogenic diet. That's what he means. And he goes, no, I mean nothing but beef and water. No vegetables, no greens, no fruit, no anything, just beef for 7 months. The interviewer was a physician, and you could just see his face drop and the gears in his brain just screech, because obviously there's nothing healthy about that. And this psychologist even said that. He said, look, I have no nutrition training at all. I have no idea if this is a good thing or not, but it's working for me now. And that's a key, right? It's working for me now. I was able to lose 52 pounds eating nothing but beef and water. How horrible is that? I mean, first of all, I guess kudos to him for being able to do that, right? You never know if he's without nutritional training, he may not know that the steak sauce or the ketchup or other things really are sugar and all that. But anyways, so let's take that as just one point of how confusing this can be, because I know millions of people are going to watch that interview and they're going to go, wow, I'm gonna start this new beef and water diet, and you'll probably see a book about that next year now. Keto 7.0, just nothing but beef. But here's the problem with that. It is not sustainable. All of the research that's ever been done on sustainable diets show that a low carb, higher fat diet is the least sustainable. Harvard has done studies on this. JAMA has done studies on this. It's inevitable that somebody who tries that kind of approach is going to crash and burn. But in terms of what we're talking about, metabolic positioning, there are some key principles in focusing on carbohydrates and learning to manage carbs. I'm not going to say throw them all the way out, but if you just learn what they do in your body and how to manage them, you're going to find that, okay, I do need to understand carbohydrates, and I can't eat all I want, But where's that line between I can still eat healthy things for my body, I can still have energy, my brain can still work, I can still have some flexibility, and that's really what metabolic positioning is. So it's simply this, Kyle, and uh, everybody watching, Kyle knows this, of course. He's one of our amazing program owners up there in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And the reason he asked me to talk about this is just because it really does illustrate the point. So a normal person is cruising through their day, and we have three energy sources primarily: carbohydrates, protein, and fat. So you hear the term macros slung around now, and that's just how we came up with this, more than 15 years ago. When we started tracking macronutrients, people just abbreviated that as macros, and now that's kind of what we're stuck with. But those three macronutrients, protein, carbs, and fat, have different roles in the body. So protein breaks down into amino acids, and those are the building blocks of everything from cells to how we maintain or gain muscle mass. Very vital for even immunity, things like that. And there's a certain amount of protein we need. There are RDA adjusted values. There are other research and science organizations that have shown, where those ranges are. And you've got some flexibility there, but you just really need the amount of protein you need. It's like water in your diet. You need it, and you're going to suffer without having enough. Too much doesn't give you any more value, just zero value by going too high. So you want to really stay in that range. Now we get down to the two macronutrients, carbs and fat, that really give us the most energy. And I'm going to try and make this incredibly simple in terms of what these do in your body and why you might want to favor one over the other. It is true that if you just ate fat alone for your energy, if you did push away carbs and say, I'm never going to eat carbs again, then all of a sudden you can move through your primary cushion or buffer between you and losing body fat, which is stored carbohydrates. Carbohydrates that we consume, anything from a baked potato to a bag of Doritos to a grapefruit, that's the carbohydrate source, the polysaccharide or disaccharide that gets broken down into glucose, which is blood sugar, and then then our cells have what they need for energy. Our body can operate normally. We have 100 trillion or so cells in our body. When glucose is present, blood sugar from carbohydrates, we're always going to use that first. We want to use body fat, but if carbs are present, we're going to use carbs first. So you've got to understand that in terms of metabolic positioning. So if I'm always going to use carbs first, then why not just eat beef and water? Why not just get rid of all the carbs? Well, then you go through a very harsh adjustment where your body has to start using all body fat almost exclusively, and you can use a lot of fat for energy. At rest, you use about 60% of your energy needs from fat, from the fat that you consume and your stored fat. But as soon as you get up and start moving, you start working out, you start doing any activity whatsoever, your body instantly starts converging to use more glucose, because that's immediate energy. So not only from the food we eat, but just like we have stored body fat, we have stored carbohydrate. So we store about 3 to 4 days worth of carbs in our body. So our liver is kind of the main hub of, when your blood circulates through your body, it's going through your liver. Your liver is almost kind of an operating system for your brain. So it's constantly monitoring what's happening in the bloodstream and telling your brain, and then your brain makes changes to your biochemistry. And so your liver has this nice little pool of glucose, stored carbohydrates in your liver, that if your blood sugar gets too low, you can pull from there. It's kind of like a little savings account. You can just draw from it anytime you need, a little line of credit for glucose in your liver. And then when you have extra, you refill it. So it's this constant fluctuating little glucose line of credit. Well, if it's always full, or we're always refilling it, then we miss an opportunity to need body fat, because what body fat does, when we have to go to the longer term energy store of body fat, we chemically turn that fat back into blood sugar, glucose, and then we use that instead of relying on what's in the liver. So we've got some good graphics. Maybe Kyle can post some of these when we're finished. They're in our book also. If you guys are clients and you have access to our online digital copy of 50 Days to Your Best Life, they're in there. But I want you to think of these energy sources in this way. This may clarify it and put it in some categories for you. I already said that protein, carbs, and fat are the three macronutrients. We can consume all of those. We also have stored versions in our body. So now you almost have two layers of those three macronutrients. We have what's coming into our diet, into our digestive system, and then we have those stored versions. I want to, if my goal is to lose body fat, out of those six now, two layers of three macronutrients, I want to get to stored body fat. Like that's the only one. 6 out of 6, that's the one I want. Well, we have to consume a certain amount of protein. I already established that. So, you don't have to be excessive, because excessive protein does end up just blocking body fat loss, because now we're going to use that excessive protein as energy. So again, we need to get that back into that nice tight range of getting everything we need for health and for our physique goals, and then put that aside. Now we've got stored fat and dietary fat, stored carbs and dietary carbs. To get into that metabolic position where I can burn body fat up to 50% faster, I have to first limit my ingested carbohydrates. So I'm not going to have a bag of Doritos anymore, because I know that contextually my body can only use, and I'm speaking for me, maybe 15 or 20 grams of carbs if I'm at rest, not really doing anything. Maybe 50 or 60 grams of carbs if I've just trained really hard. Our bodies can use anywhere from 50 calories an hour at rest and at sleep, all the way up to 600 to 1,000 calories per hour if you're training like Kyle the Madman CrossFitter. So you've got that massive range. And so the context of my meals, the context of my day should dictate how much I'm consuming. Because if I don't need a bunch of carbohydrates and calories, then I'm again going to be hampering my way of getting into that body fat loss. So the first thing I'm doing, remember we've got protein, stored protein, amino acids in the muscle tissue and all that. That's going to be only hopefully increasing as you're training. You're increasing lean body mass, bone density, that kind of thing. Dietary proteins taken care of, because you're going to find that nice range that you need to stay in. So I've got carbs and fat stored as well as eaten, ingested. So I'm going to manage my carbohydrates. I'm going to make sure I've got the right amount for my day. I'm going to make sure that I'm not storing new carbohydrates, because if I overeat carbohydrates, I not only refill my stored carb levels in my body, anything I can't eat or digest and assimilate at that time, that also now gets stored as body fat. So I'm trying to lose body fat, and if I overeat carbohydrates, I'm actually storing new body fat. And this is the tricky thing with dieters, because it's very common for us to do great for a while, maybe 2 or 3 days, or maybe even 5 out of 6 meals in a day, and everything's churning along great. And then we just kind of go overboard a little bit. We have that gigantic 75 or 100 gram carb scone from Starbucks, or like I said, you walk in, it's dinner's not ready. You walk in, and instead of just making a nice dinner and waiting, you start mowing down everything you can find in the pantry. And at those moments, even if you've done a great job all day long, or all week long, or all month long, as soon as you do that, you can start creating a pattern at that moment in that day where you've now stored new body fat that you have to then lose again. And so this is why some people lose weight in a very slow, or at a slow pace. They just get stuck in the cycle where they do really good, and then they sabotage. From a metabolic position standpoint, if you get to that point on the continuum where you are accessing body fat at a greater, faster, more consistent level, you will lose at a much faster, greater, consistent level. And it's really remarkable when you see. We've got clients, hundreds, if not thousands of clients a month, who are constantly on our forum and talking about how they lost 8 pounds this month, 11 pounds, things like that. We had a lot of good reporting from our last team challenge just over the weekend, and it's common for people to say, I've never been able to lose this fast. You guys are magicians, sorcerers. I love your program. And it's not magic or sorcery. It's just getting them to that metabolic position where they can stay there consistently, and then you get much faster, better results. And that's the importance. I started all of this out by saying, I want you to be able to manage this process. I want you to know your correct pace, what's a proper pace for you to lose body fat. I want you to know that if you want to take a weekend off, the holidays are coming up, and I certainly don't want my clients to just sit there and eat nothing but dry turkey and green beans at Thanksgiving. So we're going to have a plan, for those days or the holidays. Here's what we're going to do to make sure that you at least stay quasi-responsible on that metabolic continuum. Here's how far we can go without blowing 2 weeks of progress. Let's have a couple of meals, and let's start thinking about the portions we'll do. And you can have an amazing meal, way more food than you probably think, but we still want it to be objective. And Kyle, thanks for your patience and listening to me just drone on here, because I know this all is totally, in your wheelhouse as well.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna let you pick apart what I'm saying here to any holes you think I'm leaving that could be better answered. I want you to help me clarify. But the bottom line is, guys, when you get to that point where you have used the stored carbohydrates in your body because you're managing your carbohydrates well, you've got your nutrition plan, your meal plan down. Maybe you're even mathematically tracking those protein, carb, and fat calories. You're looking at how many grams from each one of those macros you're having per day. That's our ultimate goal for people, no matter where they start. And so now it's just great math to you. You can make sure you're plugged into where you should be. It's routine, gets easier. That allows also a lot of flexibility, where you can decide, well, if it's just math, if I'm supposed to have 150 grams of carbs today, does it matter if that comes partially from a bowl of Cheerios instead of my normal bagel? Absolutely, you can do that. So that's the kind of freedom you get when you get to that final objective state of tracking your macronutrients. And then eventually those habits are so ingrained, you can just look at food, any food, even if you're in a restaurant, and say, well, yeah, I can see this is probably this much protein, carbs, and fat, and so this is what I need for my meal. I can order this way, or I can, take some of this home, or whatever. But you're always going to be in control, and you're going to find a lot of freedom in that, because the ultimate goal is for you to know how much protein, carbs, and fat will allow you to work through those stored carbohydrates, and then you can access body fat much faster. And the reason you're going to see this is a little bit more of a balanced approach in terms of, it's not super low fat or super low carbs, because you do need for health a lot of the even phytochemicals and essential components of those foods that come from all three. When you throw out entire food groups, it's really to your health peril. Certainly it's not sustainable, and certainly gives you no options for flexibility. So that's why it's important on all levels, for your health, for your physiology, for your speed and ultimate goals, to attain those goals, and for sustainability. It's all important. But I will say, here's the interesting caveat when I say that we want to not throw any macronutrient totally out the window. When you consume dietary fats, that's the macronutrient that has the least value for your health or for energy. So some interesting studies started coming up several years ago, probably more than a decade ago, that when you consume fat, dietary fat, and your calories for that meal are pretty stable. It's just what you need for a meal. Let's say 500 calories for the sake of argument, or maybe for a snack 250 calories. Any fat that you consume there gets stored as fat. Almost all of that fat gets stored as fat. There's a very low thermic effect, because the body doesn't really do much of a digestive process. When we consume that dietary fat, it just gets into the bloodstream and it gets stored as fat. Whereas carbohydrates, your body's going to first look to store them where we can, just like we store fat. We're going to store carbs, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, we're going to store them in the muscle tissue for energy. We're going to store some in the liver, but this is why it's important to manage them, because we don't want to store too much. And then, carbohydrates are what gives you energy. And in these studies, it showed, one study in particular, that when people overate carbohydrates, and they did some pretty amazing work, 21 days straight, they had people eat 250 grams of carbs more than their calorie needs were. In, I think it was 6% of those calories from carbs got stored as fat. So, but any calorie from fat that was extra over your calorie needs, that's stored all as fat. So you could consume that much carbohydrate and still store that little body fat. Now, before you all say, okay, Kyle, Joe just said I can eat as many carbs as I want because, it has that much of an effect on metabolism and it's not going to get stored as fat. It did get stored as fat, just 6%. And because you were already out of a calorie deficit, obviously those people weren't losing weight and they were still gaining fat, but just 6% of those calories instead of all of the calories, instead of 100% of those calories, which would be the case if you ate 250 extra grams of fat. Then you would have accelerated how much. So that shows two things. We have to be in a calorie deficit to lose it all, and then we have to make sure that we're losing at the pace we want, and we can tap right into that stored body fat. So what do you think, Kyle? How are we doing trying to make this understandable?
I think you're solid. It's hard for me to jump in because I know this, so I comprehend everything you're saying. So I think it's good, though. I think it made total sense, at least on my end of things.
Well, what would you add? Just having that, what I said as a background, what maybe practical things do you think make it easier for people to understand that, we got to have carbs still in there, but not too much, and fat is, something that we can kind of push to the side, at least while we're in a calorie deficit, because then we can have more carbs. I would rather have an extra bagel a day than an extra teaspoon of, olive oil, or I would rather have, I'd rather trade in a steak for a chicken breast so I can have extra carbs, so I can have that baked potato. I'd rather have a chicken breast and a baked potato than a steak and no carbs.
Yeah.
I mean, those are things that a lot of people understand in performance, because those carbs are going to give us that energy. But interestingly, I mean, you do have to make that choice. If I am having a high-fat meal, I understand that if my calories are too high, all of that fat gets stored. So if I'm going to have a high-fat meal, I'll actually try and keep my carbs lower.
Yeah.
I did that at a barbecue place in Nashville last night. Pulled pork, which is pretty fatty, and we also had some kind of a side dish thing, and so I had green beans and coleslaw, that kind of thing, as my carbohydrates, because I didn't want to have all of that starch I could have had in potato salad or French fries or baked potato or something like that. I knew it was going to be a high-fat meal, so I just chose to make that particular meal, just one meal in my day, a little bit lower, or actually a lot lower in carbs, just to make room for that fat. So that's where you've got ultimate flexibility. And if you know some of the basic physiology of nutrition, you can make those choices meal to meal, day to day, and still stay right on track.
Yeah, totally. And since Cherish jumped in here, and since we're kind of talking about carbs and weight loss, I feel like this would actually be a good question. But so all these people in this group right now are all part of our gym, the CrossFit gym here. So what's kind of cool about that is a lot of them, even if they have a weight loss goal, they are still very in tune with wanting to be performance-based and increase their strength levels and muscle levels, which is kind of cool. They're not just focused on weight loss, right? So kind of makes things a little more interesting. But like Cherish was asking, I feel like this could tie in right here, but she wanted to know if it was possible to lose body fat and muscle, and build muscle at the same time. I actually have a lot of people that have asked me that. A lot of their goals are to drop the body fat percent, but increase, some strength and muscle. So when we're talking about how would you illustrate that, I guess?
Yeah, so this is a super easy question, and I don't know why so many quote experts get it wrong. I know we as people like to just dichotomize things. We like to have like a yes or a no, a right or a wrong. And there are people who say, of course, you can build tons of muscle while you're losing weight. You just have to train hard and eat right. And you have people who say, no, that's physiologically impossible. If you're building muscle, that means you have to be in a calorie surplus to build muscle, and you can't possibly build or lose body fat in that surplus. You've got to pick one or the other. That part is mostly true, but again, there's a context and some nuances to consider. So if you are new to lifting weights, nothing's going to stop you from gaining muscle. You're going to have this massive rise in muscle mass gain, even if you're losing body fat. I remember specifically taking a guy who had not lifted weights before, pretty young guy. He ended up having pretty good genetics for muscle building, and he wanted to enter a physique transformation contest. And this was to win a Corvette and $50,000, and there were, 50,000 people entered in this contest. And this guy in 8 weeks lost 20 pounds of fat, which is an aggressive pace, right? 20 pounds of body fat in 8 weeks, and he gained 15 pounds of muscle. So that seems insane, and I would say results not typical. I have the before and after pictures, and it doesn't even look like the same guy. He went from this skinny fat guy, just looked like a chubby tennis player, to looking like a bodybuilder in 8 weeks, because he had just enough body fat to lose. I mean, he got shredded. He got down to 5-6% body fat. So he didn't have 100 pounds to lose, and he just made a little dent in it. So he physically had that appearance change, but he had never lifted weights before. He was all of a sudden was eating protein properly. He was doing all of these things. Everything converged to him so that you could physiologically break that rule. When people say you can't do both, you can do both in a context like that. The average person, I've been training pretty aggressively for 35 years, and I'm not gonna gain new muscle while I diet. I can regain lost muscle. I went through a couple injuries and a surgery last year, and I've been on a process of gaining muscle and losing body fat, but in that specific context, I had lost muscle because of an injury. So again, physiologically, the average person is not going to see those results unless you get all the way down to this final little nuance, which is, let's say you just improved your nutrition and you improved your training so that now you're creating a little microcosm of that old client of mine I'm talking about. So you can say, well, you know what, I really did. I lost 10 pounds of body fat, and I actually gained a pound of lean body mass because all of a sudden my training was better and my nutrition was better and I was super consistent. So you created that perfect storm of variables where that could happen. But again, it's not the biggest worry anyway, I should say, because if you're training the way you should, you're at least strengthening lean body mass, you're increasing bone density, you're getting all of those things taken care of, and you're losing body fat, which is the most important thing. If you're trying to lose body fat, your best goal should be to train like hell so that you don't lose lean body mass. If you're training so hard to just not lose lean body mass, you probably will not lose lean body mass. And as you lose body fat in overall body weight, that's an incredible accomplishment. So I answered that from every angle possible. And the funny thing is, like I finished with, it just really doesn't matter that much. your genetics are your genetics. You're going to retain as much lean body mass as you can, and you want to eat and train like you're going to get the best of both worlds, and then you will.
Gotcha. I know there's a girl. I'll let you jump in on this one too. There's a girl named Alyssa that wasn't able to be on today, and she wanted to ask more specifically after her CrossFit workouts what she should be eating post-workout. So I don't know if you want to jump in. I have my own simplified things that I always say, but maybe you have a better answer than me. You probably do.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm glad you brought up CrossFit again, because I know a lot of people who created the whole CrossFit umbrella, you know, years ago. They all bought into paleo. You know, they could have bought into anything. They could have been Atkins people. They could have been Pritikin people. They could have been Barry Sears people. They could have been vegans. So, you know, they've created almost a religion around CrossFit, where if you do CrossFit, you have to eat paleo. And that's just not true. You know, you should be able to choose how you want to eat.
Yeah.
And I personally don't have a problem with paleo, because paleo at its core gives you the ability to eat carbohydrates. It's just more in the form of fruit, and some starch, which may, you know, they're just coming from the ground, things like potatoes instead of wheat or something like that. So whatever you do, even a modified paleo is going to be fine, because you get some carbs, because carbs are performance. Like they're so important for that immediate energy need. So regardless of how many times you hear people say that you can train just as hard, you can be just as strong, you can have just as much lean body mass, and you can perform just as well on a zero carb or a low carb or a ketogenic diet, that's just factually bullshit. There is no research. All of the research contends the opposite. And think of how intuitive this is. You know, let's say you're a pro tennis player and you're going to play a 3-hour match at Wimbledon. Do you really think you're going to do your best eating just fat? You know, running baseline to baseline. Do you really think if you're an Olympic sprinter or an Olympic marathoner? I mean, you see them marathoners and people, you know, getting their little Gatorade a little bit, you know, just 10, 15 grams of carbs here and there. Do you see anybody ever grabbing a cheeseburger or a handful of almonds, you know, or a tablespoon of MCT oil? It just freaking doesn't happen, because the body doesn't work that way. So if you want to perform your best and not suffer and not feel like hell, then you have to have some carbs to perform. And that doesn't have to be antithetical to body fat loss. It's a matter of managing and strategically placing them where you can. So I'll give you just an example of, first of all, pre-workout for your paleo, or I'm sorry, your CrossFit workout.
We don't do paleo.
You know, you're getting ready to go train, you know, really, really hard. If you've ever trained fasted, you can survive that, you know it. But if you've ever tried to have a small amount of carbs first, you know how much better you feel. You know how much stronger you are. You know how much harder you can push. So I would always prioritize a small amount of carbohydrates, even if you want to be mostly fasted. If I wake up and I'm training in the morning, I'm not going to go eat an omelet and a waffle and then 15 minutes later go work out. But I might have a half a scoop of protein powder in a rice cake. I might have something that gives me just enough carbohydrates to really surge into that workout. It's quite literally priming the pump of the energy systems you need, the glycolytic energy system, the aerobic and anaerobic energy systems in your body. You cellularly go from one energy substrate to another, always glucose first, then your stored glycogen, then body fat. And you want to have a running start into that body fat, because if you have enough carbohydrates, the energy that you can expend and the amount of force and the amount of physiological work that you can maintain accelerates so much that that little bit of carbohydrate you used is eclipsed by the overall higher amount of calories and body fat you use during that energy. So that's what I would do pre-workout. Now your question post-workout, I would always do protein. I mean, especially if it was a really aggressive workout, you want to have protein as quickly as you can. It's one of those things that if you can have a shake with you in your bag, in your locker, that's going to help recovery start right then. Research is pretty clear now that it's not life or death to your lean body mass if you wait for an hour. You know, you're going to go home and make a meal or something. But you want to have protein for sure. And if performance is a big concern, a big goal of yours, you do want to have some carbs to refill some of the stored glycogen you lost, because carbohydrates in the insulin that will shuttle glucose into the muscle cells, that creates an anabolic environment, which is how you rebuild muscle. That's how you build muscle to begin with. And so protein right after your training will make sure that you're not losing muscle. It's pretty clear from research that that's going to at least stop the catabolic muscle wasting processes. But getting some carbohydrates to even a lot of carbohydrate creates a continuum of how aggressively you recover and how much muscle mass you can gain. So that's where we have to go back to that whole premise. Can you gain muscle and lose fat at the same time? Well, if I'm really trying to gain muscle, I'm going to eat a lot of carbs after my workouts because I want massive recovery and massive anabolic environment enhancement. But then I've just shot myself in the foot in fat loss, because now I've totally refilled my glycogen levels up to the top. I've probably overspilled a little bit into fat storage, and so at the very least, I'm putting myself into maintenance. And so you have to decide which is your priority. Am I really trying to lose body fat, or am I really trying to gain lean body mass? If it's somewhere in the middle, then where is that line? You know, a coach like you, Kyle, says, well, for your physiology, your genetics, your frame size, weight, the training level you're at, I know how hard you're progressing, I know how long you've been dieting, you know, this is what's right for you. This amount of carbohydrates will help you achieve all of those goals, and you're going to hit that sweet spot. So, you know, it's I hate answering questions where I have to say there's no really clear answer. It's just the answer you want it to be. You get to pick on all of these continuums, you know, where your biggest priorities are, and then you're in control.
Nice, nice. I might have one more for you. I'm just seeing if anybody else. I'll ask one more because I know this came up too. What about, so these guys are working pretty hard in the gym. They're not just hanging out on a treadmill, walking up on the incline, right? We got some weightlifting and a bunch of cardiovascular stuff going on. What about, this one might get me in trouble with somebody, but it's fine. I'm just kind of playing around with her. What about when we've talked about this before, without going on a whole side chapter of like metabolic damage and all this fun stuff that is out there now. When people tell you that if you're under eating, your body kind of shuts down and you cannot lose weight, and you actually have to eat a lot more in order to make your body want to let go of body fat. Can you jump in on that at all by chance?
Yeah, I would love to. So we just recorded for our podcast a second installment on a little mini series we're doing on fasting, and I mentioned there are 3 distinct phases of fasting or starvation, and how it takes getting into that 3rd phase where all of a sudden the hormone glucagon production goes way, way, way down. And that means that your body's in that conservation mode to start saving energy. And that takes about 5 days, 3 to 5 days of pure water fasting, meaning you're eating 0 calories. So on an acute level, if you want to suppress, there's no such thing as metabolic damage. You know, I think my contention of that a few years ago kind of destroyed that whole concept.
Right.
So now people are calling it metabolic adaptation, metabolic suppression, and that's a little bit more correct. And so, you know, your metabolism can be suppressed, and then it can rebound, and you can do all these things to make it change and undulate. And again, you're in control of that by the way you eat. But it is a total fallacy that all of a sudden, because of the way you're eating, your metabolism is broken and you're never going to be able to eat again. Um, but I want to frame this in a way that you do see the edges of the danger where not to go. So again, if I'm just going to stop eating, it's Sunday afternoon, so I'm going to say, okay, I'm not going to eat for the next week. Well, by about Thursday or Friday, my metabolism is going to start to fall off a cliff, and it's going to stay there as long as I'm not eating anything. So if anybody wants to join me in a 0-calorie, you can eat nothing at all for 5 days or 7 days, I guarantee you'll lose at least 15 pounds, and because you're starving yourself to death. But you will reach a point where your metabolism starts to come down appreciably, but then as soon as you start eating, it comes back up.
Yep.
And you can do that in a more subtle way if you're just under eating calories. And by this, I mean way under eating. I've seen studies that show that you have to eat 500 calories or less. So now we're going from 0. I started with that extreme example of fasting, starving, and you're hurting your metabolism within 5 days. Well, if you're eating just 500 calories, so now you get to eat 2 granola bars per day. That's it, 2 granola bars. And you do that for 3 months. 3 months. Now your metabolism starts coming down, and there will be a gradual effect down there, but it takes about 3 months to get to that same level of fasting. So you can break your metabolism by eating 0 food for 5 days, or by eating nothing more than 2 granola bars without exception for 3 months straight. But beyond that, if you're just eating, even if you have to eat a pretty low calorie diet, what you would consider low, 1,000 calories, you'll often see women in their 40s or beyond who have thyroid hormone issues, and maybe they're sedentary and they have pretty sucky genetics to begin with. To lose weight, they have to eat 800 to 1,000 calories. And so many people online who don't know anything about nutrition might say that's too low, you're going to hurt your metabolism. It's only too low if you're not losing, or if you're losing too fast. If I'm eating 800 calories a day or 1,200 calories a day, and I'm losing a pound a week, then that's a pretty good pace. If I'm losing 6 pounds a week, then I'm probably eating too low. But to your point of having some kind of metabolic suppression or adaptation that goes too far, you're only going to know that by the amount of food you're consuming plus your results. And then you do have to know the context. This is the final thing I'm going to say as far as a warning. I started out with the extreme of fasting, then the extreme of eating a very low, medically qualified, very low calorie diet for months. Now let's go to the next layer, which is just dieting for too long. Let's say I've had to lose 100 pounds. We know just by being in a calorie deficit for a long time, let's go out 6 months or 9 months or 12 months, your body will start to adapt. Your body will start to say, well, I guess this is the new game. I guess I'm only getting this many calories forever. And so I have to adjust to that level so I don't run out of stored energy too quickly. But you can make changes in that, or you can decrease how far you're suppressing your metabolism just by having some higher carb days or higher calorie days. So, even somebody's just starting off dieting now, I like to do that with 1 or 2 days a week where you have a slight calorie increase. So I'll map out the entire week so there's enough calorie deficit for the week, but we'll have a couple of days that are a little bit higher. And then maybe you might need, Dr. Eric Helms has been talking a lot about this in the last year, diet breaks. He's making that phrase very popular now. So what if you've been dieting for 3 months? Maybe you need to take 2 weeks off.
Yeah.
Not gain a ton of body fat, but legitimately bring your calories back up for a couple of weeks and then hit it again. Those kind of things can help your metabolism not become suppressed in an adaptive way. You're not going to all of a sudden see this metabolic adaptation where you're just going to be stuck there for a while. I will say that in terms of metabolic set points and what your body wants to do,
Yep.
takes it takes a long time. So if you've dieted for 6 months or a year, it takes 6 months or a year for your body to come back up to that metabolism that's going to be more normal for you. That's why personally I love to lose body fat slower. I've never tried to lose more than a pound a week, even when I was competing as a pro bodybuilder. And now that I'm not competing and I don't have deadlines like that, I simply even choose to go slower. I mean, it's way easier to lose even a little bit slower, and then your metabolism doesn't have to fight against that adaptation.
Gotcha. So you got. So I'm saying too, if you had somebody that was stuck, they were trying to lose body fat and they weren't losing it like 14. Let's just make a random 1,400, 1,500 calories. The answer isn't to increase calories to then lose more weight.
So I'm gonna say first that you have to know the context, because if you're truly at, let's say, 1,500 calories and you're not losing weight, if you just started dieting and you've been tinkering around with your food levels and you're saying, well, I'm at 1,500 and I'm still not losing, well, then you're just not in a calorie deficit. If you were in a calorie deficit, you would be losing. So through exercise, training, which is expenditure, or food intake, you need to find a place where you're creating a better calorie deficit. Now, if you started out at 2,500 calories and you were losing weight, and then you had to drop to 2,000, and then you had to drop to 1,800, then you had to drop down to 1,500. If you've lost 50 pounds and you found that you've had to decrease your food intake along the way, then you can keep doing that. Let's say that now I got to go down to 1,200 calories, then I got to go down to 1,000 calories. You can keep doing that, and it's like loading a spring. You are suppressing your metabolism, you're experiencing metabolic adaptation. You might be able to do some small diet breaks and keep your metabolism moving, or you might have to just decide that that's enough. And again, I'm talking about somebody who's lost a lot of weight, they've been in a calorie deficit, and so now they just feel like they've run into a brick wall. They're just not losing anymore. Well, it might behoove that person to go through even an extended diet break, where you say, okay, we're not going to all of a sudden go from 1,400 calories to 2,500, because then you're going to probably store a lot of body fat, but let's go up to 1,600. And we're going to stay there for a couple weeks, and we're going to go up to 1,700 and stay there for a couple weeks, and 1,800. They're not going to lose weight. They're not going to see that, oh, I'm adding food, so now magically I'm losing weight. You're creating a gradual stair-stepping increase in your metabolic capacity that might cost you even adding a little bit of body fat for a while, or at least not losing. And then as your metabolism picks up steam with this upward spiral of metabolic building, then on that higher calorie level, you might see that you actually do start losing again. And so now you can start your diet again with a higher metabolic set point and more food.
2 seconds.
But I know what you're trying to get at here, Kyle. A lot of people just think, well, I'm not losing, I'm not losing, I'm not losing, so I must not be eating enough.
Yeah.
And that's just not true. That's like saying, my gas tank is full, but let me just try and shove more gas in that gas tank. That'll help. As gas is running all over your car and the pavement. It's if you're not losing weight, it's because you still have too much in reserve. The food intake that you're consuming every single day is keeping your tank full, and you're not having to tap into body fat through what we started with in the beginning, which is metabolic positioning. You gotta get through that stored energy in terms of carbohydrates. You got to get your food intake for your day managed so you're in that deficit. Then you can get to body fat as an energy source.
Right on.
Cool, man.
That's all I got. Unless anybody else, no one else has asked any questions, I think. So they're still kind of, Lindsay and Cherish are still watching, but.
Well, I know you're recording this and you're going to be able to post it for other people to see. So You know, I just want to make sure that everybody knows, first of all, that I appreciate you, Kyle, as one of our Diet Doc program owners in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and you creating this kind of opportunity for your clients is phenomenal. But if you guys want more stuff, Corey and I and other people in our company have a podcast that we do almost every day. So the Diet Doc Life Mastery Podcast, certainly on our website, thedietdoc.com, we have hundreds and hundreds of articles and blogs we have categorically archived that even talk about things like this. You can go see video and get articles in article series on metabolic positioning even through that. Appreciate you guys listening. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for swinging in with us.